So, Brian, how you doing today?
Awesome. We had a great guest, and Bret Naber joined us and helped shed some perspective that I think was enlightening. In that there's so much that's the same in terms of what he is challenged with in higher education, technology leadership, as a lot of us who work in the private sector have had to wrestle with as well.
Yeah, no, and this was an interesting interview for me because I don't know anything from the higher education segment in technology other than when I went went to
Right.
college.
Yeah.
And your experience is what, registering for classes, and someone gives you an email. It's like
Right.
it's not anything more than that. But it's kind of interesting to see that as we talk to people in all these different industries, the challenges are just kind of always the same, and it always just kind of comes down to leadership, right?
It really does, and something that resonated with me that Bret talked about towards the end of our conversation today was it really boils down to impediment management and continuous learning. And, that could be true across any segment of either leadership, technology. I mean, you name it. It's to me, that's really what, our flavor of problem solving is all about. Welcome to another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Nick Lozano, Washington, D.C.
And today we're joined by special guest Bret Naber, who is the CIO of the University of Northern Colorado. So we're happy to welcome, I think, our first guest that we've had that is really operating in the technical domain in the higher education field. So interesting to talk with you and explore some of the challenges that you may face that look a little bit different than what folks in the traditional corporate world may be wrestling with.
Great. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking.
All right. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Well, give us a little bit of a background about yourself. What led you into technology, and how did that then bridge into higher education?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, my background is kind of interesting. I had a really good earth science teacher when I was in high school, and I thought for sure that was the field I wanted to go into. And so I started out as a geologist. And my first 2 years in college, I studied, earth sciences, and I thought, man, this is what I want to do. I love this stuff, and it was concrete, and there were rules, and I sort of understood how that all worked. And at about my junior year, I had to take a career services class, and I had to look at all of the people in the field and what they were doing. And at the time, unlike probably now, all of those geologists were in between jobs, and they were trying to find work, and they were traveling all over and going to remote places. And I recognized that that wasn't really what I wanted to do. About that time, I saw a position had opened up at the university for someone basically taking care of operations, just loading tapes and doing various things on a data
Mm-hmm.
platform. And so I applied for that job. I went in. A guy had already come in right before me, and they had decided he was the person they were looking for, and they hired him. And I was really disappointed. I said, I really want to do this job. And they said, well, this particular person's a student athlete, and he might need some help. So, if you want to work 1 or 2 hours, maybe you can work into something. Well, I did that, and very quickly they needed more help, and so I covered that shift, and I learned about everything I needed to do. And as I kind of got used to things, I started to see what other people were doing. And there was a guy who would cover a night shift all the time. And I said, well, I want to know how to do what they're doing, because my boss would, I'd come in the morning to cover a shift, and he would have worked all night. And I said, surely there's something I could do to help. And he eventually taught me how to cover that night shift. Well, then that turned into covering the night shift. And then I wanted to do some programming because I saw programmers. And so I quickly changed my major to computer information systems, and found that my problem solving uh, desires were really met with getting into IT. And so, it was like you had a programming challenge, and you could sit there for 3 hours and get stuck on something, and then you could walk away, and then it would click, and you come back and you get it done in 10 minutes. And there's something about it that I really liked. And then I started to actually see the things I was learning in class actually happening at work. And so, working as a student employee in an IT department was wonderful. And I was studying, IT stuff at night, when I would cover that night shift. And very quickly, they gave me a programming project, and I put together something, and that went really well. And at the time, and this isn't all that long ago, COBOL became really popular. It was, or not, didn't become popular, but it was what they were using, and I needed to learn it. And so they taught me COBOL, and I had this new, object-oriented programming, and I had COBOL, and I was able to sort of mix the two worlds together. And so it really was this perfect, timing and marriage of kind of older IT technology and new kind of object oriented, and even at the time thinking about doing things in a more agile. That was really starting to get popular. So they had the waterfall method, and I was like, well, this agile, these sprints and stuff, and that was a new concept, and it all really worked out. And so I've been at UNC now for well, if you count the student years, 22 years.
Wow.
And
Wow.
kind of went up through the programming ranks, and became an assistant director and then a director, and then they did a nationwide search, and I became the CIO. It'll be going on 6 years ago. And so along that way, I finished my bachelor's degree, and then went back and got a master's degree in educational technology, and uh, and that's how I got here. So pretty interesting. I thought I would leave Greeley a long, long time ago. I grew up in this town where UNC is, and thought for sure I would go off. And here I am, still in Greeley. So, but it's
Wow.
been great.
Well, that is a fascinating journey, and
Yeah.
it's you've gone a lot of places, even though you've stayed in one place. How's that?
Right.
Fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because you work with people, and then you become a supervisor, and so you have all of these relationships you built, but you built them as a peer. And then when you become a supervisor, that's a really interesting thing to work through, from the psychological impact, or just trying to, you've got a different type of relationship than when you just step in and you're the boss, and and it's like, okay, well, this person works for you. It's like, I've always had this opportunity to be working with people. They're not working for me, we're working together. And I think that's really helped me develop my leadership style, because I never really, it's a, a collective piece of work, and we like to think we're kind of a weak matrix organization, where we kind of use the resources we need. We kind of pull people in when we need them, and it's not really so hierarchical. I mean, there's certainly, there's org charts, and they're hierarchical, and there's a president and a provost, and there's the whole organization. But generally speaking, when you need that subject matter expert, you go to them, and that's who you use. And so that can make things really productive. And that can be some of the fun of higher education. Not to mention that I can also go for a run at lunch and run with a geologist, or I can run with, and so I can run into somebody in the hallway that's a chemist, and
Yeah.
it's fun, because you're getting so many different types of personalities and exposure to things, and different ways of thinking about problem solving.
That is cool. That is way different than I think what most of us experience in a more corporate environment.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of the same types of roles and types of people. There's probably only about half a dozen different variations of roles in the organization that we're in, and so it doesn't have quite the swing of diversity that you just described.
Yeah. Well, and it leads to, different types of problem solving. If they think they need a piece of software, an open source piece of software in a lab, and maybe we can't, contractually find a common ground, and they want to use that. I mean, we're trying to, solve problems on the fly for things like that. And then I think people also forget about, universities are businesses. So I mean, we have an HR system, we have a payroll system, we disperse financial aid to students. I mean, and so there's everything that a business normally has. And so the IT department really has a lot of diversity just within itself, because you have people helping in the computer lab, but I also have a programmer who's in charge of making sure the ACH files, make it to the bank and people get paid. And so, you really you have a lot of diversity in that respect too. And I think the people that stick around in higher education IT, it's because you get such a variety of projects. I mean, you might be working on a VM, some sort of, project, and then you swing over and you're doing, something completely different, helping somebody with a grant maybe. And so there's you get a lot of different types of projects. We very seldom have like that, like kind of super specialist. I mean, there's places where it's sort of necessary, like a database administrator or a network engineer. You need that expertise. But a lot of other people, they're general, and sometimes it even leads to challenges when we're trying to figure out our organization, because there's so many similar jobs, even though they report to different people. And so it's like, well, these things really
Mhm.
are the same, but you report up through, a different part of the organization. And so we're centralized, but we still have, we almost have 70 employees in our IT department. So
Wow.
again, there's a lot of diversity. So
Wow, that's a large group.
yeah.
And how many of those are they all full-time employees, or is it a mix of students and full-time?
We do have students, and we mix them in, wherever their expertise. I mean, every once in a while, we'll come across some students who have kind of a programming background, and we'll try to plug them in those kinds of jobs. But we also have the jobs that are, sort of take care of a computer lab. They're real passive kind of jobs. We really we hire people a lot of times at our technical support center. So a lot of they'll start on phones answering questions, and then if they want to continue to do that, and what's interesting about that is those aren't IT people all the time. And we've had people that were, nursing majors, and actually, we get them in and they would start doing things, and then we'd find that they had a programming, or they had some sort of, like, they had that logic base that IT people have. And you'd be like, are you sure you want to be a nurse? Like, we think, you might be really good at this job. And so it's really interesting in that respect too, is you get some people with different backgrounds. We have communications majors, which obviously, are very helpful, but they get on, and and then sometimes we move them around, and our support services, like doing desktop support stuff, that's usually kind of the logical next step. But if they start wanting to, script things and, do some programming, then we sort of move them that direction. Or we had a student who had a kind of a database desire, and they wanted to go into that. Well, for anyone who works in IT, hiring database administrators is difficult, and we don't have, significant pool in Greeley of database administrators. So when we have somebody who has an interest in that, we'll give them the training, that they need, and try to sort of grow our own. We talk about, and we've had a lot of success doing that. We have, I would say, probably 30 to 40% of our employees were students probably at one time, or at
Wow.
least, went to school
Wow.
here. And so, yeah, that's kind of a fun pipeline to have. We rely on it heavily. I mean, I was an example of it. And actually my two direct reports that are directors, they did the same thing. They kind of worked up through as a student. So that makes it, that's, we all have this sort of vested interest. It's almost like we work for a co-op. It's like we want this place to be successful, and it kind of comes from growing up in the organization.
That's cool. So for listeners who aren't familiar with Colorado, talk a little bit about the size of Greeley, and is UNC really sort of like the main employer, or what are the
Yeah.
various
So
industry
so
types of town?
Yeah, so Greeley's a really interesting town. It was largely a ag town. It had a huge meat packing plant, and so that was really what Greeley was known for. It was Monfort at the time. I think it then became ConAgra, and now is some acronym I can't remember, but that was really what the city was sort of built on. But UNC's been here since the late 1800s, and it was a teaching school. It was called the Normal School, and it's been here the whole time. The Greeley's been here, and it's always been an interesting relationship for the city. In a lot of ways, I don't think Greeley embraces the university, but it's been here, and it's 13,000 students is roughly what we have right now. And when it's all said and done, about 3,000 employees. That's counting student employees, and that is, it's a relatively large chunk of the population of Greeley. I think we're just a little bit over 100,000 people. And we're one of the fastest growing cities right now, mostly because of the oil business. So in the last, I would say, probably 4 or 5 years, the oil business has just boomed. And Weld County is the largest county in Colorado, and there are lots of places to put oil rigs, and you see them because it's really taken over. And so the population is booming. Restaurants are finally coming to town, and it's really the town's really growing, and the infrastructure, the road systems are suffering. It's hard to come in and out of Greeley now. It's become you know very, very busy, but it's good too. And and the oil business has brought in different types of people. So you still have the agriculture piece of Greeley, and now you have the oil piece, and then you have have UNC, and then obviously the services for all these businesses are growing really fast too. So
Wow. So that's it almost sounds like when you describe this, it's like you're a lean startup, right?
yeah,
You have so many people who do all kinds of things and help out in some capacity, to try to help to make the team better. But I imagine, because this is a world that I don't know, managing. But what type of challenges are there when you bring on, like a student employee? I mean, because that's not a traditional relationship where you'd have where it's a full time employee, where you're investing in them because they might stay here longer. It's just a different dynamic. So, what type of challenges do you face with that?
yeah. So it's trust. It's a lot of trust. I mean, the things that we might put in their hands, um, it takes us a while to get to a place where we feel comfortable. So, we take care of a lot of student information, and that student information, includes, a lot of private data, and trying to, for somebody who's going to maybe go into the programming side, we have to have a lot of confidence that that person's going to handle that the right way. They also, they're interfacing with faculty members, and they're coming in contact with a lot of information, and seeing, kind of behind the curtains of a lot of the business side of higher education. And so you can, we get a really good opportunity to sort of try them out, and
Hmm.
working them through the support center, we can see, how interested they actually are in it. Are they gonna show up on time? I mean, you have the same problems you have with any um, employee who maybe is a little less mature. Are they going to show up to work on time all the time? And we get to work through all those problems, and then once we know that they're committed and they want to do something, we start kind of handing them off, more and more stuff. And we have some employees who, are who take on so much work, and they need help. And so, if we can pair them up with a good student employee, and that student employee can offload some of the work, that's a good opportunity for them, and it works well for us. Trying to have a good onboarding, and try to educate the students, and have, documentation. I mean, that is part of it. I think in some ways I wish we would do better at that, because obviously you have students coming on, but a lot of times we really look for those students that are in their freshman or sophomore year, try to get them here, find out that they're good, and then we can keep them for 2 or 3 years, and then sometimes even longer than that if it works out. So it's really building that trust up. And most of the time, the student has some vested interest too. I mean, on their resume, working with a enterprise team, is a really good thing to have on their resume. And we had a couple people. We have a chief information security officer that reports to me, and he's done a really good job of hiring students. And those students are going off and getting great jobs because they're having all kinds of experience. They're doing awareness campaigns, or they're maybe looking at the intrusion prevention system, and looking at logs and doing some stuff that's like real life experience, and then they can go off into the work field, and jump right into a job where you needed some expertise or some experience. So usually it's a mutually beneficial relationship most of the
Hmm.
time.
Very cool. And it sounds like to me you have a very diverse generational team, right?
Yeah.
You probably have a lot of, a lot of college students are normally younger, not always, right? Some people decide to go to college
Yep.
later in life, and the crazy word we hear lately is the M word, the millennial, right?
Yep.
And now we have Gen Z, and we hear all these things that they just want to know what they're working for. They want to know, what they're doing that has a cause behind it.
Right. What's the
And Brian and I
motivation?
always joke, I'm like, that's just what everybody wants, right? It's not a millennial or a Gen Z thing.
Yeah.
um, but what in your experience, leading these multi generational teams, have you picked up any skills that you found are like must haves in doing that, or any good tidbits for other people to know?
It certainly is a difference. I mean, there's a difference in generations and expectations. One of the things that I had seen more recently was, there was a little higher expectation when a student employee would start, that they would get put on some really interesting projects. And as I was saying before, there's sort of a trust element, right? It's like, are you gonna
Mhm.
be here? Are you gonna be a good employee? Can I trust you? Can you follow through? and you have to build that up, and it doesn't come in 2 weeks of coming to work on time. It comes in, months of experiences and building that relationship up. And what I would find is that there was a lot more like, when are you going to give me that really cool project, that really cool web development project to work on? And frankly, I have full-time employees who want to do that, and that's the kind of thing that enriches their job. And so I can't just offload all those interesting projects to the student employee who's, maybe they're awesome, but there's sort of a balance there, right? And so it's setting some expectations, for both parties, and saying, I'm going to need you to do some hard work, up front. I mean, there's students who have worked on the wiring committee, and they're or wiring team. They're crawling through tunnels and doing all kinds of really hard labor work, and sometimes that's how they sort of have to earn their way through. They're not just going to get
Mhm.
to sit down and start programming the firewall. That's what they think they should have. And so it's really setting expectations and trying to make sure that they understand that. And some of them don't. We had a project where I had a student who, we had lost some information. We had some corrupted files, and we basically needed like 10,000. I can't remember exactly what it was. It's some sort of student information. We needed them rescanned in. And so I
Mhm.
said, I know this isn't what you want, but I need you to scan 10,000 things in and index them. And, he kind of took it and walked out of the room. And then, the next day he came in and he said, this isn't what I came to, this isn't what I was planning on working on. This isn't what I wanted to do. I said, well, sometimes this is the kind of stuff you would have to do. And then, once something else comes along, we'll give it to you. And he was so disappointed about that. And he was upset. And we eventually decided, well, then you need to move along. And that's what happens. So, I think with any employee, whether it's a younger employee, or somebody who's been in the field, I think it's communication, it's expectations, having a good open line of communication, trying to share as much information as you can to help them be successful. It's always the Simon Sinek why. I mean,
Mhm.
and you can't beat that, right? I mean, that's the
Nope.
one piece of that's the rock. If you can build that, and most of the time you should be able to do that, um, then they should come along and be able to help you out.
That's a great universal truth there for any industry that you're working in with technology. In particular, I think the mental preparedness that I mean, Nick and I were just joking about this on a podcast we were on earlier this week, where Nick's changed his job title to janitor on LinkedIn, but there is
I have, yes.
there is this tendency, for a very custodial expectation of folks who are in tech. And so sometimes you end up with things that come across your desk where you really find yourself questioning, what in the world is somebody thinking, that this is actually my responsibility? But
Absolutely.
you start to deconstruct, it's what you hear referred to sometimes as the curse of competency, right? You've proven yourself so many different times that folks just have the confidence that you can actually get it done. And, it tends to be the nastier the wet cleanup, the more likely it is it's going to land in IT, right?
That's true. And even within IT, I mean, I see this get carried out a lot. It's, yeah, the better you are, the more you take on. And then the problem is, on the other side of it is, when you're not doing a good job and you're not competent, and these things aren't happening, we start taking things away from those people. And
Mhm.
it's unfortunate because, how do you build that balance? And I think that's probably one of the most challenging things I see, is that, the high performing employee is absolutely not only capable of doing more work, but you naturally give them more work and more things that are, high profile. And really trying to figure out, how do you manage those expectations for those other folks who, for one reason or another, aren't as successful. Is it training? Is it, what is it that you need to sort of help them with? And sometimes they're just not as motivated, right? I mean, it's just, you could try to
Mhm.
find that motivation, but some people, they want to clock in, clock out, and go home, and they're content with that. I mean, I've really found that in the IT field, there are people, and there used to be these traditional operations positions. You'd open up a manual, it would say, this is what you need to do, and you do these things and you do it in this order. And some people really like to do that. And
Yeah.
they come in and they would do that, and then their day would be over and they do it again the next day. And they were content with that. It's hard for me to imagine that because I would go crazy. But there is a place for that, and I think in some respects in IT, you have some people who gravitate towards that. They want that work, and what happens is as technology starts to shift and that operations job, for instance, sort of dries up, what do you do with those folks?
Yeah.
Now I need, now the skill set that I'm looking for is more front facing and being able to communicate with the end user and gather needs and really get to the bottom of a problem. I don't need a code cutter sitting in the back office, just
Mhm.
plugging away, coming up with brilliant code. I just don't need that as often. And now I really need that person who is quick on their feet, is thinking of problem solving and that sort of thing. And so some of those kind of traditional operation type IT folks, I think they're struggling. I think they're struggling to adapt. And I think that's, like I said, I think that's one of the challenges that, we're faced with. And I don't think that's necessarily just a higher ed problem. I think
Oh
it's
yeah.
in IT altogether. But I'm not sure what the solution is to that. I'm still learning.
Yeah, I would say for me that's even happening in the private sector, right? We saw it kind of started with email with things moving to the cloud, and people were death holding on to their Exchange servers. I'm
Yep.
like, why do you want to manage that? That's like nothing to like get your anxiety up than managing an Exchange server. Nobody wants to do that. And I think you touched on it very well. Is that as much as we want to say these soft skills, right? These emotional intelligence and everything, these are becoming more important. I feel like in the technology field, even on the lowest level, the tech support level, right? They're almost like customer service representatives frontline for your IT department. They need to be able to talk to people when they're calling tech support. Normally they're frustrated with something and the person on the other side needs to be helpful. So I mean, and especially you have students, younger people who might not have worked in a job before. How do you bring them along and kind of show them, like some of these emotional intelligence skills, like like empathy and less listening, active listening? Is there anything you like? Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that's a loaded question,
that's
but
a really tough one because
and especially for you because you came up through it one time too, from being the student all the way up to the CIO. So I feel like when you suggest things, it comes with a little bit more clout to people that are below you.
yeah.
They're willing to listen to you because you've done it.
I struggle with this one because often wonder if it is something you can train someone. I think it's sort of an inherent characteristic that someone has. I think if anything, you're sort of, I don't want to say weeding it out, but you're sort of those people who have that skill set are excelling through the organization and the other ones aren't. And
Mhm.
I mean you can do so much. I mean you can try to teach someone how to communicate better and I've struggled with a few employees who, it's like you need to get this message out to tell people that the system's down, and the communication that goes out is so so direct and so technical that people don't understand what it really means. And
Mhm.
I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. And
Mhm.
then I can give it to someone else, and it's like they write this beautiful paragraph that gives everybody this sense of ease, and and there's nothing that I could do to sort of teach that. They just it just came to them, right? And so I don't know. I worry that that's not something you can absolutely train. I mean, you could definitely cultivate it, right? I mean, if you think somebody has that skill set, you could help them develop it and make it better, right? You could give them
Mhm.
some training about how to communicate it better, or to put it in a certain format. But I don't know if you can take somebody who doesn't have it and get them there. I mean, I think I've tried that a little bit, and it gets back to, at some point you have to take some of your employees and go, this is your strength, and I'm going to use it as best I can, and I'm going to try to make
Mhm.
these other things that maybe could be better. I'm going to try to help you along, but I know that you're never going to be that thing. We got really excited about project management. This is a really good example of this. We got really, really excited about project management. And I can say that I got excited about it too. And we thought, why can't everybody be a project manager? We've got, we could have 67 project managers, right? And so we started really kind of pushing that down into the organization, saying everybody's going to follow this kind of a PMI kind of framework.
Mhm.
If they had a desire to do some agile, that was fine too. It's really that you're going to be project managers, and we really started to kind of farm that out to people. And lo and behold, maybe it's not a surprise to you, not everybody's a project manager. Not everybody
Yep.
likes to hold other people accountable.
Yeah.
Some of us, it just sort of comes natural. It's like you have this objective, it's got to be done in X amount of time, and I'm going to come and see you when that time's about to come. And people just didn't like to do it, and they didn't like to hold people accountable. They didn't want to have these meetings every week where they had to talk to a bunch of people, and we really learned we had to kind of pull that back in and go. But the one thing it did for us though is when we pushed it out, we found out the people who did like to do it, and kind of held
Hmm.
on to a few of those folks and said, okay, we're gonna ask you to do more of this, because I think working across the organization, and if you're a network engineer, and most of the time we would do it more with kind of the senior management layer, for them to reach across the organization and tell a database administrator that they've got to get something done by next Wednesday, I mean, everybody's nice to each other, but at the end of the day, what's their priority really? The database administrator is like, I already had 100 things to do, and now this network engineer is asking me to get this thing done by a certain time, what we found is that didn't work that well, right? And so you almost had to have a certain amount of leadership, organizational hierarchy to have authority to get that thing done. And so that's where I feel like the kind of the weak matrix sort of falls down, is that when you're taxing resources that are already at capacity, they're gonna gravitate towards the thing that they like to do, the thing that their job. If they're a database administrator, they're not going to go out of their way to sort of help this other project along. And so we've had to really tune that, and try to, we actually formed a project management office to sort of identify the resources and make sure they actually had enough time to help with the projects, instead of just going, well, I have a project to do this thing and I need a DBA, and this is the DBA I like to work with, and I'll just, tap on their shoulder and get their time. It just doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
Wow, you covered a lot of ground there. I want to back up a couple of steps.
Well, it was a loaded question. So.
Yeah.
No, it's great. It's great. I love it. And great insights. I appreciate you sharing all of those things. You touched early on that more customer-facing sort of role, where you've got someone that I would qualify as more of a business analyst type, or a BSA. I think, so I got my master's degree about 15 years ago, and mine is an interdisciplinary degree between math and computer science, art and design, communications, right? And the intent at that time was really extending kind of what Steve Jobs talked about with that intersection of technology and liberal arts, right? That's that generalist kind of mentality where you're able to bring all those things together and navigate all of that. It's interesting to me that you bring that up, because my current organization, we've had a lot of those types of conversations where that is exactly the role that is the most needed, particularly as we're trying to advance how we're creating greater efficiencies for folks within our business units. Because you really need someone who can go out and just speak English and have, good bedside manner with people who are trying to get work done, and they're not going to speak in technical terms. But you have to also have the mindset where you understand how to interpret some of the things that are being told to you in sort of a requirements gathering exercise, so that you can go back and then you can sit down with the technology team and really explain, these are the things that they're looking for, and they kind of need it in this way. And, it's interesting that kind of led into the project management topic, because I think, to me, that hybrid of BSA and PM has really become one of those crucial roles where, now not only have you been able to gather all that information and share it between a couple of these different demographics, but you can also rapidly prototype some things and just say, okay, go back to your end users, and is it kind of this? Is this what we're talking about? Are we on the right track here? And be able to do those things in more iterative sprints, so that it's not, all right, we heard you and we went and we built all this cool stuff. Isn't it great? And the person at the desk is like, well, no, I just needed it to do this thing. You've completely misunderstood.
Sorry, that's not on the waterfall method. We'll get back to that when we go back to the beginning
that's right.
again.
We'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah.
uh, so I find a lot of value, as a certified Scrum Master myself. I mean, agility is one of those things that has been part of my process. And, part of what you touched on, Bret, that resonated with me is, how do you find that right qualification for the project manager type? Because everyone can manage projects. Now, how they're managing those projects, could be a bit speculative. One of the folks that we helped sort of groom was someone who came from a systems administration background, but really had sort of a high EQ, asked great diagnostic questions, and was very organized. And you just see the interaction within the team. And it's, well, I know you're going to do that, but have you thought about the order of precedence in these things? And really that should happen first. And there's a dependency here. And, and all of a sudden it's like, that is the project manager that we need. And they hadn't really ever thought about it, so from a talent cultivation perspective, I'm kind of curious, is that part of your approach? I mean, do you just kind of, you learn where the talent can be developed in a certain direction just by that kind of interaction and observation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would see people on projects and they would have just like you described, they would just sort of see this is the order that things need to happen. And they would sort of be able to sort of break things down and kind of decompose a problem in such a way that it was either digestible or it was, that you could kind of spin it both directions. You could explain it to the end user, but you could also go to the technical team and sort of describe what needed to happen. And I can think of one particular example where I had someone like that, and very quickly we were like, oh, we have a special person. We have a unicorn. We've got a unicorn, and we've got to do something about it. And the the one thing I get challenged with on these is you find a unicorn and then you either want to put a saddle on the unicorn, or you want to give them a lot of things to take care of. And we found that we built a business analyst unit because we were having more and more needs in this direction. So trying to streamline something, trying to workflow it, or just make it more efficient. We had a lot of work in that space, and it wasn't necessarily dictated by what technology it was. Like if it was part of the ERP, well, it was still sort of making the business process better. And so we had like I said, a unicorn, and we put him in that position as a manager, and decided hopefully they will bring along some people just like them and teach them that skill set. Again, it was a very natural thing. It was like we identified it and we were like, oh, this person has it, and we put him on that team, and he's done a wonderful job, and he had that skill set, and he was able to jump into projects and find out here's what the problem is, and again just sort of work with the end user, and then also go back to the programming unit and say, here, this is what needs to happen. The challenge that we've run into with those business analyst type folks, and they're project managers too, right, is that they get involved in these things and then they drive them to the finish line, and then we don't really have a good system to put them back into operations. So if they implement a project, now that piece of software is out and it's live, well, they're the subject matter expert and everybody wants to go back to them. And they were wonderful to work with. The end users love those unicorns, and they think that they're the best person in the world, and they don't want you to hand that project off to somebody else. And so now that business analyst unit for us has too many systems to maintain, and so we're really working on kind of farming that work back out. But that was one of those things. It's like you get those business analysts involved, and they very quickly understand the business element of the system and the technical element. They understand the data feed behind the scenes that makes it all work, and then they also understand, oh well, this particular thing happens this time of year, and so they just understand all those pieces and how they go together. It's invaluable.
Yeah.
I mean, the more of those we had, the more problems we could solve. I mean, but those people are rare, very, very rare.
Yeah, and I think that knowledge transfer that you just described, it has its own methodology to it in order to be effective, and it can take longer than probably what we think of in terms of typical project mop up. You get to the
Yeah.
end, you've completed delivery, your documentation's done, you've transferred whatever, maintenance and support needs to be aware of. But all of those soft touch elements that you're describing, it's
Yeah.
sort of, what is the nature of this thing that is beyond just the technical components, and how does that then get, imbued in the knowledge transfer effectively? Part of where we've seen that happen, because you can't, make someone over capacity, and now that you've created something cool, a little piece of your time goes away forever, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you can't really do that. And so, typically what happens is that, it's sort of a slow motion disentanglement over maybe a 6 or 12 month period. It's a
Yeah.
lot longer duration than you would kind of hope for. And in my experience, sometimes it's, whatever the length of actually delivering the project was, it's kind of an equal part on the other side, to let
Yeah.
go of it. And that can be tough, especially if you're a lean organization.
Well, and a lot of times they don't make it easier for you. They don't want to
Mhm.
let go of it. They
Yeah.
put all this time and energy into it, and now they kind of want to retain it. And I think that's another, challenge that we find is, people hold on to those things, right? I mean, IT people, I think, have some inherent, hoarding characteristic, and they can't help themselves, and they put their time and energy in. I mean, IT people don't give up their stuff easy at all.
Yeah.
That's the thing that made them valuable, right? And they
Mhm.
want to hold on to that, and that's a really hard thing to sort of untie, to get someone to realize there are more things you can get involved in. I know you've taken care of this particular system, but now you've got to hand that off. You need to delegate it. We have a lot of working managers, and the biggest challenge is, their time is getting taken by these systems that they maintain, because whatever happened, it's an upgrade, it's whatever, they start spending time on that, and then it's taking away from the time that they should be developing their employees. But it's nice to have a working manager too, because they can basically jump in that seat. I always talk about them as sort of co-pilots, right? It's like, you want to have a co-pilot, because if that pilot's gone, they're going to be able to fly the plane. So you take a database
Mhm.
administrator, our manager over our database unit, he needs to be able to understand how all of those databases work, or at least log on to them and be able to do some amount of work. I can't have him just be a manager and just say, hey, did that database get backed up last night or whatever. They've got to kind of know how to do that job. So finding that balance of that working manager versus just strictly manager, that's another fine line to travel. And those business analyst people are kind of good at all of those things, but I think they do sort of gravitate towards solving problems, and solving problems it's not personnel problems often. They want
Mhm.
to solve technical problems.
Okay, delegation's always a tough thing for
Yeah.
everybody, right? Especially as IT people, we kind of love our projects and then want to hold on to them. For me, I'm like, get this thing away from me. I don't want anything to do with it
Mhm.
anymore.
That comes
I
with
want to do
time.
something new and cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
like, I want to do something new and cool. I
Yeah.
don't want to manage this Exchange server anymore.
That's right. The alternate
So
is finding yourself increasingly useless because you've let go of so much that now all you have to do is be in upper management.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's that line that you cross, and I remember thinking about it a lot when I was in a certain position, and the director came in and said, I'm going to take away all of your admin access, because every time I come in to see you, you're doing programming. And I remember going home that night and thinking, I'm going to have to make the jump. I'm going to have to,
mhm.
I'm going to have to go, and I'm going to have to let those technical skills, fall. And I'm going to have to just hope that this management thing works out. uh,
6 years in, I think you're doing okay.
yeah, so far so good.
I feel like with the good technology people, there's always that leap, right? You got to make the decision: are you going to go into management,
Y-
or are you going to stay down on the technical level and cut your technical chops, either further into something? Which some people are perfectly fine with that, not moving up any further when they are, and that's it's great. We need those people too.
Absolutely. We think about that a lot, and thinking about how the IT industry is sort of evolving too. I mean, one of the things that I'm finding interesting is that those technical folks, I mean, you really like when you talk about pay, I mean, those technical folks in a lot of ways, you know, need more funding than maybe even your managers do. I mean, they have a skill set
Hmm.
that's so unique, and trying to sort of build that up, because traditionally it's like, well, you want that next step, we're going to make you a manager, right? I mean, I think IT field talks about that a lot, that you sort of you rise to that level of incompetence. Right, it's like you just keep getting moved up until you're doing something that you're not good at, and you really have to be careful to do that. But a lot of times, in order to get people to pay, to get them to stay, you find yourself doing that. And I think that's something we're faced with, and I think the IT field generally sees that. Got to be really careful. You also don't want to take your technical skill out of the workforce and make them a manager when they were really doing a lot of technical work. So um, that's another really tough challenge for sure.
Hmm. So how are you solving that challenge? Are you like do you have like a mentoring program or anything to help identify, um, these individuals who either want to move up or kind of want to stay in the technical role?
Yeah, I mean, we're I think we're really in touch with our staff, and have kind of found where there's people who have a skill set and they want to continue to develop that, and they're not interested in management. From my side of the house, and being sort of the administrator of the unit, it's trying to figure out if there are sort of steps in both directions, right? It's like, if you're going to continue to build, and let's pick on a network engineer. If you're going to continue to get these Cisco certifications or whatever, is there a path for you to continue to grow professionally, and get, and have us pay you appropriately, and have you go down that road, as opposed to you going down the manager side. And on the other end of the spectrum is, if I have somebody who really wants to sort of be a manager and wants to be in charge of doing things, and maybe doing some project management, do I have a path for them? And trying to develop that. And for us, working within the state classified system, for instance, there's a lot of things that get in our way. And so we have, half of our staff is sort of a contract employee, and the other half is a state classified employee. And so we have to really work through those rules. But it's something I spend a lot of time on, and making sure that we're in the right ballpark for pay, and making sure that professional development is something that I think we in higher education do a relatively good job at, because obviously we're seeing education all the time, and we know what the value is, and there seems to be um, an inherent understanding that we need to make sure our IT folks have the professional development that they need, and then we make sure that people are using it. And so that helps a bunch, because we don't all we can't be the highest paid employer. I mean, if people want to make more money, they can simply drive 60 miles to Denver. I mean, there's I have no competition for that. That's the reality. I mean, they may have some more windshield time, and they have to deal with that, but there are opportunities in higher education, and just government jobs. They just don't pay as well as private, generally speaking. And so there's a balance. And one of the things I think that we provide is, flexible work and professional development. So, as far as the mentoring goes, getting back to your original question, we've played around with some amalgamation teams where we put people
Mhm.
of different skill sets together, and what I think we found was that they actually just like to get to know each other better. And occasionally they would find something that somebody was doing, and they would, maybe want to learn more about that, and it would give us some good cross training opportunities. Um, but we're going to try something actually this spring, to have some level down meetings where we kind of mix in some of the managers with some of the staff lower in the organization, and try to maybe develop some of those relationships. We're always trying to find new ways to get involved, and have those contact points.
Very good stuff. I think constant contact's the key with that, even if you don't have a mentoring program, right? Just walking around talking to your people
Yeah.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah. Brett, you clearly have a mind that's well suited for an academic environment.
Thanks.
You're one to keep up with, for sure. It's ironic that you and I had to run into each other in Arizona to be able to come back and have a conversation in Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, that was kind of actually exactly the reason I did something outside of higher education. I get involved in a lot of higher education conversations, and I was finding that, it's we all had the same problems, and we're complaining about the same things, and I was starting to worry that, I just didn't have enough,
Mhm.
outside perspective, and that was really holding us back. And um we all have the budget problems. We all generally work with the same vendors. And it was really good to go to that conference in particular, because I think it was helpful for me to see that everybody was sort of struggling with the ERP going to the cloud. I thought that we were kind of
Mhm.
behind, and we were struggling to make that transition and trying to figure out what to do and how that was going to go on. And then kind of seeing all the private sector people having exactly the same problem,
Oh yeah,
and
it's
many
all the same
times,
problem everywhere.
yeah, and many times in a much worse scale than I was worried
Yep.
Right.
about. And I actually came away feeling better. But
I mean, sometimes it's good to get that fresh perspective. It's like when you're coding something, right? And you missed a semicolon and you didn't know you did that. And somebody walked by is like, oh, it doesn't work because of that. And you've been staring at it for 3 hours trying to figure it out, you know?
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For me, it was usually, I'd step away from something, and I, literally, you know the phrase, sleep on it. And I would
Yeah.
go home, I wake up in the morning, and it's like there's something funny that happens in the mind, at night when you sleep and you dream, and
Yep.
suddenly this thing that you've been like challenged with all day, you come back and it's like,
Yep.
and then
That's what I found running
everything
kind of
works.
was. It was I'd be out running, and I'd be like, I would have not an infinite amount of time, some sort of set of time, but I'd be out there, and then I would realize I was sort of untying these knots in my brain, and I would come back and it'd be like, oh, this is easy. And it would give me a really good opportunity to sort of work through those problems. That's I think sometimes my best work is while I'm running,
Yeah,
for
that
sure.
mental reset is absolutely necessary, and I think particularly for anyone who is faced with technical challenges, working in the types of fields that we've all worked in. You have to have some kind of lane change with the way that your mind is typically forced to think, to sometimes get that mental reset, so that you do have whatever that process is that sort of magically takes place, and you come back with this completely fresh perspective. And that's something that I think we hear a lot now about. You need to get up and move around. You need to incorporate
Hmm.
some kind of physicality to what is normally just sitting at your desk all day. All of those things, I think, help contribute to this is part of the necessary mental shift that has to take place, particularly when you're dealing in work that is primarily mental.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Brett,
Go ahead.
Nick saw I was about to say something there. I was going to
Yep.
ask you, Brett. We're getting close to the end of our time here. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about something inspirational to you, from whether it's a book publication, if it's a website, if it's a piece of media. What's something that has helped shape some of your leadership perspective, or something that you think would be beneficial to some of the technical leaders of this program or listenership.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously the Simon Sinek stuff is always a good place to go. You can't go wrong there. I think it's for me, it's really getting a lot of different voices in my head, and trying to find as many resources as I can, and not to necessarily make it all about IT. Reading about leadership, in other areas, has really helped me. I actually listen to a lot of books when I run, and so that's been a really good way to hear more things. And I feel like every time I hear a problem solved, in another field, that I can kind of bring that back and try to figure out, there's another way to solve this problem. And I really just try to constantly absorb new things. And I think, my background, some of the educational technology stuff of this idea of sort of scaffolding, and trying to, develop ideas and sort of build on them, and try to, I think we would always talk about cognitive load. It was like, you're trying to explain problems to people. And I'm finding that I'm not, working on as many IT problems. I'm working on more organizational problems. And it's the same thing. It's just a different audience. And being able to sort of, take that problem, make it manageable so that other people can get involved and help you solve it, and trying to break it down, and make it, decompose the problem, and working with a lot of different areas. That's, it's getting other ideas, and it's trying to integrate their ideas, but also, just trying to find a way to, I don't know, work through the problem, in a way that, you have this achievable closure to the project, but you've got to find all of the things that are keeping, they're getting in your way. It's kind of this impediment management, and can you figure out, what are all those things that are going to get in your way, and kind of try to bring people along. And it's been a really interesting, year for me, because I've been involved in some projects outside of IT, and it isn't any different. I mean, you run into the same problems, it's just in different areas. And so I guess to your question, I mean, I think it's continuously learning. It's continuously trying to find new things. I mean, I think about it as a tool belt. I'd gone back and gotten my Six Sigma. Well, when I came back from getting my black belt, I realized that, this industrial, you know, procedural way of solving problems wasn't really applicable to higher education. I mean, I couldn't, we don't have a manufacturing floor. So, I couldn't go down there and go, okay, we're going to make 12 widgets today instead of 10 widgets.
Your Gemba walk, right?
Right. And, but it
Yep.
was one more, tool I had in my tool belt. It was one more way to solve problems. And I took a few things away from that and said, okay, I'm going to try to use those. So, I guess, yeah, at the end of the day, it's continuous education. It's continue to add things, and maybe it's not a leadership book, maybe it's something completely different, but what can you take from that and bring into work. And it's just amazing how many things you can pull from other places and go, this is actually applicable to the problem I'm trying to solve right now. So I think it's just keeping your brain in that learning mode.
Love it. It's like what our guest Peter Margaritis said. He always asks people, he's like, "Do you know what business you're in?" And people say, "Oh, we're in the technology business, we're in the accounting business, we're in the widget business." And he's like, "No, you're in the people business. You just happen to work with technology or finance or whatever." I think that's a great quote, and it's pretty much what you were summing up right there. You're expanding your leadership skills because you're in the people business,
Yeah.
so you're always learning.
Well, that's a great place to cap it.
So, Brett, if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I've been trying to get a little more involved on LinkedIn, and trying to put some of my projects out there, and reach out and kind of meet some people and build some connections that way. So that's been probably the best place professionally.
Mhm.
I once in a while will get active in Twitter, but that's mostly with running stuff. So as I told you
Mhm.
before, I'm active runner, and kind of that's my alter ego. So that's my kind of my getaway. But yeah, I think LinkedIn. I've been trying to figure out how to use LinkedIn the right way. I mean, I get frustrated sometimes because I have probably 10 vendors a day try to connect with me, and the softly veiled, I want to meet you, but it's really you want to sell something to me. But I really do look for those professional connections.
Yeah.
Brian was a great example, and that's how we sort of kept in touch since we went to the conference. So I'm trying to use that as a place to build my network, and
Mhm.
trying to, as best I can, go back in there and add some content once in a while
Yeah.
to kind of say, here, this is what I'm
So I
working
can
on.
tell you how I got into LinkedIn. At first, I was like you. I'm like, I'm not on this thing. This is a thing for people to find me so they can sell me something. I
Right.
know they bought Sales Navigator and they just want to call me. But somebody brought this great point to me. They're like, they have this status thing. It's like, just search for what you're looking for by these hashtags like leadership or whatever, and engage on content. Don't connect with anybody, and then eventually you'll start getting connections, people reaching out to you wanting to connect with you because you're engaging on their content. um, and I've met all kinds of people that way,
Yeah.
just by engaging that way. Like the other day, I just did a Zoom meeting with a guy who's a personal trainer, of movement doctor or whatever, for shoulders and knees, all because of conversation on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff like that. That's my only advice to you. Like, go specifically search for the content you want to see and engage, and then you'll get an idea what you want to share and what you want to do on there.
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, Nick's also it kind of takes an opposite approach from me and accepts every connection request.
I do. Yeah.
Good
You
for
know what?
you.
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to buy Bitcoin for somebody because they're out of the country.
Oh yeah, got to do
But
that every
hey,
time.
it's like this lowly, look out for janitor coin, it's coming. So
Yeah. Yep.
ICO. But yeah, that's just my advice. You don't have to accept every connection request, like me, but just get on there and engage with people and talk about things you want to talk about, and naturally people will gravitate towards you.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Brett, it's been great having you on the program today. Really appreciate your time, your insight, your brain power. You've really contributed a lot. So thank you so much for being our guest.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on here.
Sure.
All right.